This is Oral Rehab Lecture 8, Part 5. We resume at slide 29. Slide 29 and next couple of slides will deal with the basic issue of what are some, at least in your instructor's view, some general positive changes in amplification. First kind of dovetails to the last comment from slide 28, which had to do with customization. Since again, primarily hearing aid fitting is a customized kind of product, this has kind of brought us to an awareness that individual differences and variability has to be considered when we're selecting and fitting hearing aids. So again, that's generally something that fuels all of this. Point number 2, personal hearing aid fitting and assessment is sophisticated and is still in a state of evolution. There are some things that would be considered to be part of best practices relative to hearing aids, and we'll see some articles that kind of talk about these, what are best practices. One of which would be the use of what's called a probe tube microphone measure, sometimes referred to as a real ear measurement, as a way to capture the acoustic signal in the individual's ear canal. So in this particular type of, this is referred to as a verification procedure to verify the response of the hearing aid in the ear canal. And what it does is allows us to basically capture whatever individual differences that person has relative to their own ear canal size and the volume of their ear canal. All those things are going to affect the resultant amount of energy that gets into that person's auditory system. Another one that's important is the use of outcome measures. We had talked in Lecture 6 about the use of questionnaires to get persons' perceptions of how well they're doing. And so, again, here's to get their perceptions of sound quality, their perceptions of this is helping them, all these kinds of things that we'll talk about a little bit later on. When we consider what best practices include, it would include probe tube microphone measurements, use of outcome measures. I must also report to you, sadly, that even though probe tube microphone measurements have been around for the better part of 30 years, present data of use suggests only about 40% of all persons fitting hearing aids actually utilize probe tube microphone measures. To me, when I first got my first probe tube microphone measurement system to do real ear measurement, it provided me with a way to actually measure what was going on in the person's ear canal so that I could have a valid and reliable measure of essentially what the basis of their complaint was or wasn't, and then adjust their hearing aids based on science, not based on any kind of artisanship. And that to me represented a significant advancement. To me is a game changer, but it still boggles my mind that the minority of hearing aid fitting professionals do not use this particular kind of technology. It's just, I just don't understand it, why they don't. I mean, I know the reasons that they say. They say, well, it doesn't really give me any more information than I already have, which is just bogus. Or they say I don't have the time. The use of outcome measures is another one that hearing aid dispensers and audiologist dispensers will say, well, I don't use those because I know my patients and they'll tell me if they're having a problem and I know if they're not happy, so I don't have the time to do that. So again, to me, the use of outcome measures is a way to get data, and to me, having data that's valid and reliable doesn't seem to be a real bad thing, but some people think otherwise, I guess. Another sort of positive point, I think, and again, instructor bias. Remember I said here, express your biases if you have them. With more audiologists involved in fitting hearing aids, I would like to expect that we're going to have better and more thorough quality of care, and therefore persons with a hearing impairment who are wearing hearing aids ultimately should do somewhat better, I would think. One other positive change, while not contemporary, and again, I don't have a place to put it anyplace else, so let me just kind of write it down here. A second great date in amplification was 1977. In 1977 is when the Food and Drug Administration of the United States came up with a set of regulations concerning hearing aids. Now, most of the regulations involving that the FDA came up with have subsequently gone into state laws that regulate hearing aids. And so that's true in California also. So much of the California state laws that revolve around hearing aid fitting basically find their origin in the 1977 FDA regulations. This includes two primary things. Number one is that there's that the person needs to have a medical clearance. Now the notion is so a medical clearance. The medical clearance, however, can be waived if a person doesn't meet certain medical criteria. So this means that in California anyway, we have to ask the person sort of like 7 or 8 questions, and if they answer positively to any of them, they have to go. You can't fit them with a hearing aid. They're not waiverable. They have to get the medical clearance from a physician. And so you have that as one of the characteristics. Another thing that came out of the FDA regulations was the notion of a 30-day trial period. And again, with a 30-day trial period, that means that in the law, and again in state law, that a person could get a hearing aid, have it for 30 days, at the end of the 30 days give it back and get all their money back. So the notion of a 30-day trial period is a fundamental one as well, that again finds its roots in the 1977 FDA guidelines. Now, contemporary problems that face amplification. Again, as I alluded to earlier, for persons wearing hearing aids, especially hearing aids, the environment still has, wreaks major problems for them in the notion of background noise. And as I said to you before, when the background noise is speech, there really is not a clear way to remedy that. So this still is a problem. Persons will still likely, the major cause for the return of a hearing aid after a trial period would likely be, and as we'll see in an article you read by Kochkin, is that return due to background noise. The hearing aid is just picking up too much background noise. Second challenge that faces mostly the hearing aid user is that in the United States anyway, there's no single best way to get a hearing aid. And therefore that means there's a lot of competition, in fact animosity, among members of what I euphemistically could call the hearing health team. This would be the audiologist, maybe a non-audiologist dispenser. This would also be then the medical doctor. Sometimes they work collaboratively, either in a couple of different ways. I don't know that we'll see audiologists and dispensers really working as a team so much, but there's a possibility of a number of ways of conflict here, simply because the hearing aid itself is something that can produce a lot of revenue. Cost of hearing aids may be a significant barrier to many potential users. So cost and the cost of hearing aids may be such that this would prevent some people from getting hearing aids. A mid-level, hearing aid might cost somewhere around $1,500, and that would be sort of a low to mid-level product. It could be upwards of $4,000, and that's for one. And so now if you're talking of a pair of these things, now you're talking $3,000 to $8,000 as being a reasonable range for these kinds of things. Problem number 4. Cosmetics is still an issue, and again, the Lyric was sort of the best example modern day of how cosmetics have driven a product deep into the ear canal. Performance has again going to be more of a factor for maybe people who've worn hearing aids and maybe in their first hearing aid are more aware of the cosmetic issues, but by their second hearing aid, they're much more concerned about performance. So some people say, well, that Lyric is kind of a good product just to get people in and wearing a hearing aid, and then after they've worn that, now we'll put them into something that will really sort of be the best thing for them. Item number 5, there are no universally defined goals. And again, that may, that shouldn't be that much of an issue. As we've talked about, how can there be universally defined goals if there's so much heterogeneity? So that part of it sort of makes sense. But think about it this way also. There's no definition of benefit in the law. By the way, there's no requirement in California law or in the FDA to do any test on an individual wearing a hearing aid to demonstrate benefit. None. We have no legal, or at the federal or state level, no legal requirement to demonstrate that the hearing aid is actually helping the person. Again, the likely sort of source of this would be the use of outcome measures as a way to define and also measure outcome. So that's where outcome measures become important, because they're a way to quantify benefit. Problem also is that there's no correspondence or predictor of benefit to really anything. If a person wears their hearing aid a lot, does that mean they're getting benefit? Not necessarily. If a person feels that they're getting benefit with a hearing aid, does that mean they're satisfied with it? No, it doesn't. So all of these we call these different domains of outcome, are somewhat independent. And again, that shouldn't be that much of a surprise given the heterogeneity of the population that we're dealing with. Again, it's a problem. Finally, the majority of people who could potentially benefit from personal hearing aids don't have them and don't want them. The number typically that we've seen for the last, 40 years or so, is of all the people who could potentially benefit from hearing aids, only about 20% actually have hearing aids. And by the way, this includes the population of the VA who get their hearing aids for free. So the number here is that only about 20% of persons who could benefit from hearing aid fitting actually have hearing aids. And so we're talking about this population of what's called the unamplified. In American numbers, that's about 25 million people and even more ears, because it's not quite, most people have 2 ears. So that's a lot of potential hearing aids that could be fit. And again, there's more and more of those ears every year due to the aging population. And so the question then naturally comes up as to why are people not amplified? And again, this is the major question that's been facing the hearing aid industry for really the last few decades. This number has been unchanged over the last few decades. It was thought going into digital processing that with the digital processors that, wow, hearing aids now are going to be that much better, and therefore its sales are going to go up and up and up as digital processors go up. And guess what's happened? Hearing aid sales have been flat. So the digital processor, even though it was highly touted, isn't so great that, and all the advantages I pointed out to you, isn't so great that the rate of hearing aid acquisition has changed significantly. Again, the hearing aid industry is interested in this because if you assume a very conservative profit factor into this, we're talking about, and you look at the aging population, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. There's only about 10 to 12,000 individuals in America who are licensed to fit hearing aids. So if we had a significant increase in the acquisition of hearing aids, it would be a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. This is out of an article that you're going to be looking at from a guy named Kochkin. The name is down there. Kochkin is one of the leading statisticians or epidemiologists that works for the Better Hearing Institute. Again, I gave you the link for bhi.org. And so all of Kochkin's work is there. He does this thing called Market Track. And so Market Track 7, Obstacles to Adult Non-User Adoption of Hearing Aids, is part of your reading. And while, don't be overwhelmed by this, I just wanted to point out to you in this particular slide that there's many, many factors that potentially could be causes for why somebody does not get a hearing aid. So why, sorry, why no hearing aid? So could be any of these sorts of points. And so again, BHI is trying to reduce those and to try to get more people to buy hearing aids because they're funded by the hearing aid industry. So that's the basic idea. So what are some things that we've already kind of talked about? This notion of stigma over here, product perception, the fact that a person still is in denial, physical characteristics of their impairment, other aspects in terms of, we talked about their lifestyle, their socioeconomic status, a bunch of many things are at play here. And again, this is kind of a complex slide and just it kind of gives you a flavor to the many factors that are in play. One factor may be more important for one person than it is for another. And so that's why there's no universal formula for prediction or anything like that. Again, our last kind of concept here, and last slide in the slide set here, and there's also an article I sort of had for you by a guy named, it's spelled like this, but his name is pronounced Trykin. So Sam Trykin, I think it was 2001, has reasons why people don't get hearing aids. And it's really not data-based, but Trykin's a psychologist like Harvey, and it's sort of insightful as well. The hearing aid industry, and again, mostly Kochkin stuff, has looked at reasons why people don't get hearing aids. And so this is mostly derivative of Kochkin's work. From the different market track surveys that are all available at the BHI website. One of them is that consumers perceive that their loss is minimal. Consumers have varying concerns regarding cost, and not only cost, but the priority of hearing health care over other aspects of their life. The fact that consumers might have gone to professionals, and here the professionals they're thinking about are primarily medical doctors who had negative opinions about hearing aid fitting. Consumers have a perception that the value of a hearing aid, that they're paying too much for too little value, and that the features were not helpful to them. But primarily, it also gets down to the notion that hearing aids are a device that is a sign of stigma. And again, to this notion, at some point, Kochkin broaches the idea that what we really need is to have some kind of American cultural icon get hearing aids. And when there's been some opportunity for someone who is well respected by American society who gets hearing aids, and the best one and the one that's always cited is when then President Reagan got hearing aids around 1983 thereabouts. Hearing aid sales went like crazy off the chart. Not 1903, sorry. Around 1983, hearing aid sales went crazy. So you think in your own minds, and I'll ask you at some point who you think would be an appropriate cultural icon that once they got hearing aids, everybody would get hearing aids. I have my ideas who that would be, but I'm not going to tell you right at this moment. All right, that concludes lecture number 8. Lecture number 9 will be more focused on hearing aids themselves and some other issues surrounding hearing aids. And then we'll just kind of move through with lectures 9, 10, and maybe 11 that will all be concerned with hearing aids. Thanks a lot.